Hey party people, Techno here, and in this video I want to share my thoughts and opinions about this particular item right here, which is of course the Covert Instruments Covert Companion. And to do that, I'm going to enlist the assistance of one of the most covert and stealthy creatures known to man, which is the elusive Yeti. So we do have a lock that we're going to take a look at here. Now the Covert Companion, just a couple things before we dive into this that I want to say up front. One, I have nothing but respect for the individuals that are involved in covert instruments. I'm also not a physical pen tester or physical red teamer, so keep that in mind whenever I'm talking about sort of my viewpoints and opinions regarding this tool. And they are my opinions. They're my opinions that are informed by the knowledge that I currently have. And I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to lockpicking, lock bypassing, covert entry, anything like that. I'm on a learning journey myself. So some of the statements that I make here could be made based on a misunderstanding of the goal or just plain ignorance. So if you have a different opinion, you don't agree with mine, if you have a different point of view on these, please share those below in the comments. Please keep it respectful as you do so, but I'd love to hear what other people's points of view and takes on this particular tool are. Whether they are in line with what I say here, probably even more so if they're not, because that's going to be, I think, everybody needs to be exposed to different points of view and be able to evaluate those as they come. All right, with that out of the way, the Covert Companion, aside from a really awesome alliteration, what is it? It is a multi-tool of sorts for lockpicking and lock bypassing implements. In this way, it's somewhat in the vein of the jackknife sets that we see from a lot of lockpick manufacturers, where you're trying to get a fair bit of capability in a pocket-friendly EDC type tool, and that definitely is the case here, but we have a different take on that, and mostly by the fact that this is customizable and expandable, utilizing all of the different SSF tools, as they're called, that Covert Instruments offers for sale. I believe that stands for small standard form factor, however, I might not have that 100% accurate, but they're easily found on their website. So with all of those tools, you can customize your Covert Companion for various lockpicks, tensioners, bypass tools, implements, things like that. Now, as you do so, as you may have seen if you've seen this in other videos, the size of the Covert Companion can grow quite large as you add all of these tools. So that's kind of one topic I want to discuss here is all of the capability in here. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Kind of a question. Some of the other things about this, though, that I want to discuss are going to be overall effectiveness, usability, durability, longevity. That's going to be another topic that I want to get into. And then, as I perceive it, sort of, how stealthy or covert is this? On the one hand, and this is purely my assumption, but on the one hand, if it's the Covert Companion, I understand that these tools are designed around assisting covert entry. The other thing about this, though, that it seems to me is this is supposed to be a rather covert and stealthy way to carry all of these tools. For example, I could easily carry this around and use it for covert entry, but it's not surreptitious or stealthy at all. On the other hand, I could pin this away in the brim of a hat or somewhere like that, and this is not only very stealthy and covert in terms of carry and deployment, but also assist with that covert entry. So basically, is this something that can be carried around and go unnoticed? So let's get into a little bit of background here. I'll be perfectly honest. When I first saw the Covert Companion, I was dubious and quite skeptical as to how effective it would actually be. The reason for that is I quickly identified this chassis, handle, whatever you want to call it, as a key smart. So I've been using key smarts for a number of years myself, and this one, in fact, has various cabinet keys and elevator keys and things like that on it that I carry around in my bag. But as you can see here, with the key smart, what you basically have is two aluminum slabs, handles, and a bolt that goes through one side and threads into an insert on the other side. I also use a KeySmart Rugged for my day-to-day keys that I use on a daily basis. I will not be showing those in this video, however, because don't show the keys that you actually use in a photo or video that could end up online. Okay, TSA? All right. So the thing about this, though, is that obviously there is no kind of locking mechanism to this. You just have whatever is in here freely pivoting around these bolts. Slightly different on the Covert Companion. Effectively, it's the same, but the structure's slightly different, and I'll cover that here in a moment. But there's no way to lock these tools in place. For a key, that's not particularly problematic because the force is rotational, which for these tools it's going to be in a lot of cases as well. But the key itself is a pretty rigid item. Now, if you are familiar with that KeySmart Rugged or the various KeySmart accessories that you can add to your KeySmart, you might know the bottle opener, which again is on my KeySmart Rugged. I'm not going to showcase it here. But this is the other side of knowing what the KeySmart is and then also knowing how certain things work with it. Imagine the bottle opener is like this lanyard piece right here. But on the other side of it is an extension of a bottle opener. Well, if you have tried to use one of those, you would quickly realize that it is better than nothing at all, but not by much. And that's really because, again, there's no way to lock these tools in place. They freely move. So the only way that you can create resistance and put pressure on something, for example, a bottle cap or the pin of a lock, is to hold it in place with your thumb and your forefinger. This doesn't really give you any assistance or leverage in that respect, and that makes it difficult to work with sometimes outside of its, very initial use case of let's just keep a bunch of keys organized on this thing. So those are the two things that kind of turned me off of the Covert Companion to begin with. The other one I kind of already alluded to is that all the expansions that came out for this, as you saw those, you steadily saw this thing grow in size to a point where all I could think of was something ridiculous like the Victorinox Swiss Champ. Do I think this is cool? Yes. I have never met anybody, however, that wants to carry one of these in their pocket. If I'm going to carry a Swiss Army knife, I'm going to carry something more like the Tinker here, which is much more reasonable, not this ridiculous thing. And that's kind of the thing here, although we can customize this, right? So there's nothing saying you have to fill this up with all of those tools or you have to get that to that excessive size. But if you're really trying to get all of the potential capability in there, regardless of how often those tools are going to be utilized, you are going to end up with a fairly large item. So that kind of works against the principle of being a covert item. But that being said, it is something that I kind of noticed and thought, how easily carried, how pocket friendly is that really at the end of the day? So that gets to what prompted me to actually pick up a Covert Companion. Because at this point in time, you're probably hearing me be fairly negative about this. And that's an accurate statement. But what prompted me to finally get one of these things? Oh, the other thing is the price point of this also kept me at bay. I wouldn't necessarily say that for a fully loaded pick set, the price point is unreasonable. However, given the aforementioned things that I went through here, it wasn't something that I was willing to plunk down just to play around with it to see if I liked it or not. That leads us to Covert Instruments' Black Friday offering, where they offered the Slim Pickens package, which basically put the Riv Pick, which is kind of its own thing that we're going to discuss here also, and the tension tool expansion set together with the handle at a price point that I felt it was fair enough to satisfy my curiosity on. And when I picked that up, I also did get some expansion sets. So with just the Riv Pick and the tensioners, you would have something that would be approximately that thick, right about where this liner is, which you probably can't really differentiate from the other tools there, would be the other side of the handle. So in that case, you do have something that's rather compact and sleek, and then you have a variety of tensioners and some pick profiles. Fair enough. I did add some additional tools in my package to kind of get the full experience or closer to the full experience of the Covert Companion and see what it would be like to carry this thing around and use it. So what I did add in here were the wafer jigglers, and there's one still down in the handle, I think. Nope, is that all of them? No, there's one still tucked away in there. And that is something that you will encounter with immediately when it comes to the usability of this thing is accessing tools can kind of be a pain. And if you're working in a covert entry sort of situation, I think it's fair to assume that you're going to want to try to work fairly quickly. So kind of finagling all of these tools out of the handle and getting access to them, yeah, you be the judge there. But to me, it's a point against this immediately. But here you can see some of the wafer jigglers that I picked up. In retrospect, I'm not really sure why I added these, because I personally don't find wafer jigglers in any form to be all that useful, especially if I already have a rake. I did add the notch decoder, which I think is an extremely useful addition. And then we have these warded picks. And again, this is something where it's like, okay, if you have these and you encounter a warded lock, you're going to be very happy that you brought your warded picks, because apart from some situations where you can shim those, which of course means you have shims on you as well, there aren't a whole lot of other options for opening those up other than to have the warded picks at hand. That being said, personally, I don't know that I've encountered more than 1 or 2 warded locks in the wild ever, that I've noticed anyway. Of course, I have some in my collection, but I don't see them commonly used. And being somebody who's into lockpicking and lock sport, I do tend to pay fairly close attention to the locks that I encounter on my day-to-day outings. Warded locks are not something that I encounter all that often. So one has to wonder if it's better off to just keep a lower profile tool set with you and forego these locks, hoping that probability works in your favor, or these picks rather, or whether you want to pack these in here and start to build out the overall size of that. And that could be a personal decision. It could also be something that is very situationally dependent. There might be areas where you are already aware that there's a high probability of encountering a particular kind of lock that you're going to want specialized tools or bypass implements for. If I were to continue using the Covert Companion, then I would probably trim all of this stuff out, take it back to the slim pickings, and because the notch decoder is so thin, this would easily fit within the slim pickings package without compromising any kind of additional space. But if you are going to build this out, then you almost have to add some tools that you may not actually need or want. And this comes back to that idea of the slight difference between the way this is constructed and the default kind of KeySmart configuration. I also added, just for the heck of it, because I had the space, a couple TSA keys in here. So we got the 007 and the 002, 2 common keys that would be encountered here in the States anyway. And as you can see, I even have to kind of like poke at those to get them out. But, not to go back on that topic, we already discussed that. So the way that this is put together is you do have the threaded bolts that can go through to the other side of the insert. It's just a KeySmart after all. But now we also have these threaded sections, and partially these are for making sure that adequate space is allocated to these carriages, these armatures, whatever you want to call them, that hold things like the tension set and the riv pick. But if you have that on the other end, then there's going to be a fixed amount of space that's allocated to this. So if in the instance where you have no tools, like on this side I have no tools, I have to put those washers in place to occupy that space, or I could just leave this section completely bare. But if I didn't have all of these tools stacked up like this, then some of these would just be freely floating or sliding back and forth. I would have to use these spacers at least to occupy that dead space. So there is sort of a point at which the customizability is limited by the fact that you have to allocate X amount of space, which then you might as well fill up with tools kind of deal. All right, so that's what the Covert Companion is. That's how I got mine. That's a little bit of background on this so far. Let's kind of see what it looks like in action, and that's where we're going to call on our friend Yeti here. So this lock is, as we can see, it is a brass-bodied Euro cylinder. It's a 5-pin lock, and the brand here is Yeti, but Yeti is either a subsidiary or just a brand under Loeb or Wobe. I'm not exactly sure how to say this. It's Polish, and I'm not sure what the proper pronunciation of the L in the brand name is. So I'll just refer to it as Loeb. and apologize to any of my Polish-speaking viewers if they're out there. And let me know again, how is that properly said? If you know, put that in the comments. But that being said, Loeb makes some pretty impressive locks. I have some of their other locks in my collection, and they're pretty, they're solid in more ways than one. The Yeti brand, again, this is just a guess on my part, but I believe the Yeti brand is more of a lower tier kind of consumer brand for Loeb, because this lock is decidedly mediocre. A 5-pin lock, in this particular case, the bitting's not terribly great either, but that's going to help us sort of in the context of what we're looking at this in. We have a somewhat Yale-style keyway there, so slightly paracentric, but not too bad at all. And as far as security pins go, this has, as far as I can tell, one spool pin, and that is populated in pin stack number 2. So let's go ahead and see if we can get this open. I think this makes an ideal candidate for the Covert Companion to kind of show off what it can do. And the reason I say that is, let's go ahead and pop our riv pick out here, and we'll talk about that on its own here for a little bit. The reason I say that is I think it is a fair statement to say that the Covert Companion is not necessarily something that is targeting high security locks. I think this is something that is more designed for rapid, fast entry into known quantities, and in a sense, fairly low security locks. By that, I mean the locks that we tend to use most often, especially in a consumer sense in the US. Just unfortunately, a lot of the locks on the market in the US are just fairly unimpressive. Or, I mean, they are unimpressive. So this tension set is pretty cool. One thing that I really like about the tensioners for the Covert Companion is not only the overall design, it's a great design in tensioners. Actually, my favorite part about the Covert Companion, just to get right to that, but the little quality of life thing of just having the thickness of the tensioner engraved or laser etched on there is a big win. Just, it's a nice little quality of life thing, but it makes a difference, and I appreciate it. So I really like these tensioners. I'm going to grab the 40,000s. And so the riv pick, let's discuss this a little bit. Now, when the Covert Companion first came out, at least as far as I know, we had the SSF tools, the picks, and as far as I know, these are the actual SSF picks just riveted into a sort of a handle extension here. These would be mounted directly on the pivots of the frame here, the handle, whatever you want to call it, which leads exactly to that problem that I was referring to earlier about having no way to lock these down. They would have been easily, they would have been moving on you, right? So probably at the end of the day, the most effective way to use these things would have been like in a pistol grip, where you sort of would have had something like this. But as far as control and precision, especially when you're using a hook, not as big of a deal with a rake, but especially using a hook, that's just a different way of picking that requires more practice. And at the end of the day, regardless of how much practice you have, I have to think, I don't know this for a fact, somebody could be an expert pistol grip picker, I have no idea, but it's not going to be anywhere near as controllable and as sort of the way you would use a single piece pick, and you're not going to get the same level of feedback. So in response to that, the riv pick was developed, and this is a pretty clever way to go about things. I think there's a lot of compelling things about the riv pick. So those are riveted into, again, this handle extension, which allows you to have something to reinforce the bottom of that. You get something approximating a single piece pick. It's not going to be a substitute for it. I mean, there are trade-offs with everything, and this is not the end-all be-all, but it gives you a much more ergonomic way of picking, a much more standard way of picking, with the option of multiple tips and profiles in a nice, compact, lightweight package. This, even by itself, is really just kind of a compelling carry piece. Again, here, I already mentioned the tensioners are my favorite part. I actually think the riv pick on its own is a more compelling tool than the riv pick as part of the Covert Companion. That's just my opinion. Not to say it's without its issues, or it's not without its issues, and I will talk about the issues that I had with this shortly, but let's kind of see it in action. In my mind, sort of the ideal scenario here is we get our tools out of the Covert Companion, right? We're working up our way up to our tool. I'm interested in rapid entry, so I'm probably going to go to my rake profile first. We'll talk about these profiles in a moment, but I'm going to get my rake profile out and I'm going to try to, just like that, either get an open on this or at the very least get it into a false set, which we did there. So now I know that there's only security pins holding this open, spools, and I can move to my pick to systematically, or my hook rather, to systematically locate and set those spools and get an open. So we go ahead and go through here. All right, we got counter rotation on pin 2. And let's get that set. And I think I either overset something or drop something. So now that we're with our hook, we just kind of go back and we work our way through this lock. Or I just totally rotated this back to closed. So let's repeat that process. Hey, you know what? You try to do this in one take, you gotta go with what happens. All right, so we got our false set there, raking, take our hook. We got counter rotation on 2. And we pop that and we get an open. Right, that seems like the ideal scenario for this kind of setup. I think that is the pretty much the best kind of showcase of what we're trying to accomplish here. So that's pretty cool. Again, this is a compelling tool. Now the issues that I have with the Riv pick are a few that are subjective, just personal preference. There's a few that I think are solid expectations for iterations of this in the future. And then there's some that are just like, they would be really cool if implemented, but there might be more obstacles to it beyond just making it happen. So let's go through a few of them. The subjective things first and foremost. These 2 hook profiles that we have here, I'm not a huge fan of them. So we have a short hook and we have a medium hook. But the thing is, as far as these go, they're really quite large and wide. Personally, I prefer something with a slightly more fine point for precision picking. That being said, I think these are adequate. These are fine for the kind of locks that I think this is targeting. So if we think about master locks, your just run-of-the-mill off the big box store shelf 4-pin, 5-pin lock, these are probably more than adequate. But I think when you start getting into things like American locks, not to say you couldn't open them with this, but you might want something with a finer point as those pins start to get smaller and as you get more pins in a lock, for example. But again, this is more conjecture and personal preference than anything. So I'm not just not a huge fan of the hook profiles. The rake profiles are perfectly fine. I mean, they're better than fine. They're quite good, actually. So what we have here are 2 rakes from the Palmer Wicked Wave. We have the Sinusoid Quad and the Cycloid Quint, if I'm not mistaken. So solid choices there. I would say that pretty much anything that approximates a Bogota is going to be a really solid rake, if not also like a city rake or an L rake, but I think these are probably more flexible. So no issues there. Now, one thing that I also noticed about this was the overall finish of the picks themselves is really not that great. And as a point of comparison here, I will turn to, while we haven't discussed other EDC options, I'll pull one out. So the Sparrow's Mace picks, all of Sparrow's picks are really nicely tumbled, not high polished or anything like that, but they're very well tumbled so that all of the edges, all of those rough spots from being laser cut or punched out are really knocked down and you end up with a really nice finish on these. That is not really the case with these pick profiles here. These really look like they are raw straight out of the, however they're manufactured, laser cut, and then they get riveted right to the handle. I'd really like to see that additional attention to detail here to just tumble these for a while and get some of those rough edges knocked down. Of course, I can hand sand these myself, polish them up. I could reprofile these tips even to meet my personal preference. These are all things that the end user can do. But at the price point that this sits at, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a little bit of extra finishing tumbling to go into these before they get riveted to the handle. Because to be frank, there's always going to be a premium to be paid for the foldability, the concealability, all the other abilities that this has. But at the end of the day, you can get yourself 2 nice hooks and 2 nice rakes for, I'd say, substantially less than the cost of the Riv pick itself. So unless the aspects of, the folding aspects of this, the concealability factor, the EDC kind of friendliness of this are really the things that you're willing to pay a premium for, at the end of the day, if you got individual picks, I think you could get nicer picks for less money. That's just a fact. Now, the other thing that I would really like to see kind of goes into my own personal experience, which might be an isolated case. But that being said, I did pay for these with my own money, bought them right off the website. So this would have gone to somebody else. If not for me, they would have had this experience too. But when I first pulled this out of the package, the friction fit, the tension of these riveted components was really quite good. It wasn't so easy to move these that they were just going to flop around or anything like that, but it was easy enough to isolate the picks, get them in position, and then with that sort of firm friction fit, you had a really nice experience with utilizing these. Like this reinforced folded section down here is going to help whenever you apply upward pressure with the pick, but there's nothing to prevent it moving the other way. So that friction fit really kind of helped keep this in place. Was a good experience. Not too long after getting this out of the package and using it on a couple locks, I ran into a situation where all of these pretty well seized up and seized together. I'm not exactly sure what the cause was. Might have been a piece of metal flashing or something like that that stripped off of the rivet, or one of the holes that are riveted through, something like that, and kind of seized this whole thing up. But the end result was that it was extraordinarily difficult. I mean, required substantial force to even rotate these out of the handle, and then especially to isolate any one of them and put it into position. The pick at that point in time was just frankly unusable. I was ready to just, throw it in a drawer somewhere and move on. I did try to loosen it up, and as you can see, it did loosen up. I'm not exactly sure what it was because it didn't seem to be anything that I did from the outset. But at the point where this was seized up and I was trying to loosen it up, I did actually bend 2 of the picks in the process of doing that. Because no joke, I would get it open after, much pain and red indentations on my hands. To get it closed, I would pretty much have to press it against a solid surface like this to fold it up because it was that bad. Now the end result is whatever worked its way free did so, and these are much looser than they were when they were originally out of the package. So at least it's back in a usable state, right? This is much more preferable than having to, struggle to actually open this thing up and deploy it. But that being said, there's a lot more free movement here. So of course, you're always going to have that section that is reinforcing you on that sort of leveraging this against the bottom of the lock, upward pressure. But anytime you go in the other direction, this very quickly and easily folds up. Not a major issue for the rakes per se, because that actually adds a little bit of extra sort of dynamic and range of motion whenever you're doing that raking. But it is somewhat annoying for the hooks and the picks. Something you can easily work around. It still is a good middle ground between something like those mace picks, which effectively give you no handle, and something like a full-size pick. So everything is a trade-off, and this is a trade-off for one of these. Still think this is a really compelling tool. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. I think there are iterative improvements that can be done on this. But that being said, if I were to break this or lose this, I probably would actually replace it. Speaking of breaking it, the other thing that I have a concern about, not just with the Riv pick, but just with the tools in general in the Covert Companion, is I think I read that these are 301 stainless steel, or I might be picking that up from sort of pulling some different sources together to make a guess at the manufacturer here. But even so, these do seem to be particularly fragile. You can't bend them too far before they want to take a set. And I'm just not entirely sure what the overall longevity and durability of these tools are going to be. They're probably on par with a number of pick makers out there, but frankly, they are below, or they seem to be below. And so far, my experience is kind of my experience with these is supporting this thought. They're below sort of what my expectations for durability in a pick are. And just to give you context for what that is, let's go to my actual EDC pick set here and pull out one that you are all going to be familiar with because you've seen it in my videos before. And this is my Sparrow's magnetic closure. Covert Instruments Case 2. Very cool. This is my Sparrow's Tron pick. So this pick came from the very first set of picks that I ever bought from Sparrow's. That was the Dark Shift set. And if memory serves, I picked that up in probably 2016 or 2017. I think it could have been 2018, but I think I had these well before then. So I'm inclined to say 2017. In any case, I've been using these picks for 6+ years, and this pick is my go-to, right? Unless I know from the outset that a 25 thousandths pick or a short hook profile is not going to work in the lock that I'm targeting, this is the pick that I go for. If I go to a conference and I go to the lockpicking room, this is the first pick I pull out with a set of tensioners. This is responsible for 80 to 90% of all of the locks that I attempt to open. And I don't feel that I'm particularly gentle with it either. I do prefer heavy tension, and I do tend to use heavy tension. So that's 6+ years of using this pick, and it's really no worse for the wear. It's very durable, and this is sort of set in my mind what my standard for a durable pick would be. Maybe that's an unreasonable expectation or again an isolated experience, but this is kind of, where my mindset has me on that standard. I've had other brands of picks that definitely don't last. They don't last a year, much less multiple years. And I really don't think that this is going to survive the same level of long-term use and abuse as that Sparrow's pick. Is it a fair expectation on my side? Perhaps not, but it is the expectation that I have. So with that sense, I have a concern about the steel construction of this and also of the broader tool set in the Covert Companion. So for example, and this might even be an area where it comes into play quite a bit more substantially, is let's just take, for example, something like the warded picks. While some of the tools in the Covert Companion are probably not going to be exposed to a lot of torque and rotational forces, and they're not really going to have, the shaft of the tool being leveraged against a surface like you would with a pick, something like this obviously is going to face a lot of torque just in its day-to-day use. And these tools are slightly thinner than the warded picks that I have from Sparrow's, but not substantially so. I wanted to get an exact measurement, but pulled out my digital calipers, and when the battery was dead, and I don't have a suitable replacement. But just eyeballing it, these are just slightly thinner. That being said, they are far, far more flexible. And they do bend rather easily whenever you're torquing these in a lock, and that is exactly how this tool is going to be used. It's going to have rotational force applied to it. So not only do we have the metal concern here, but then also all of that force is being focused down here at the pivot, and there's not a whole lot of material there to support it. Plus, I'm not really sure how overall durable these threaded sections here will be. It's hard to say. I might be making a false assumption. I might be expecting the worst when this is more than adequately designed to handle all of that. But it doesn't inspire confidence when using the tool as compared to other things that I have access to, that it does lead me to believe that durability might be an issue with this over the long term. Now, the other thing about these, and kind of just to back that point up one last time, is that, again, if we kind of think about the intended purpose of the tool, it's not as though this is going to be used on locks that are fresh out of the package. The mechanism has been recently oiled from the factory and hasn't, seen a whole lot of use and abuse. if we're taking this at sort of what its intended purpose appears to be, this is going to be used against locks that are found out in the weather. The mechanisms could be tight, corroded, seized up, and that's just going to require that extra level of robustness in the design to overcome those things. At least that's, again, the opinion that I have on this matter. So I'll kind of leave it at that. But yeah, long-term durability is kind of an open question. And to be perfectly honest, I probably won't use this long enough to find out whether it's an issue or not. Might be, a criticism on my part, but it's just kind of the reality of the situation. Okay, so discussing all of that stuff. Now concealability, I think, is the next thing on the list, right? So then the question becomes, we have the tools here. The tools, hey, they work as advertised. They do what they're supposed to do, right? The wafer jigglers, jiggle wafers, the warded picks, open warded locks. I've done all of this. We've already seen that this works quite effectively for getting in to, moderate to low security locks at the very least. So all of that is good. Now the question is, how discreet is this as a carry option for your tools? And that's one that I'm going to say is, it's going to be dependent, again, situationally. How do you have this thing configured? Obviously, the more tools you stuff in here, the larger this gets, the more unwieldy, and I would say the more, obvious the carry becomes. If I drop this in my pocket, it is going to print. So for anybody who is attentive enough to be observing whether I'm carrying anything, for say in my front jeans pockets or my rear jeans pockets, this is going to print. It's going to be obvious that something is there, as opposed to some of your other concealed carry, discrete carry, whatever the correct terminology for lockpicks would be. There's going to be other options that I think are going to be far more suited to be carried discreetly. I mean, at the one extreme end, you're going to have something like this, a pair of Bogatas that are wrapped up. Again, pin this inside of your hat, inside your waistband, under a shirt sleeve, really wherever this is going to go. And it's going to be a really discreet option. Now, the trade-off is, of course, your capability is also much more limited versus something like this. Less than ideal tensioners. You do have two very effective profiles here, but arguably less effective against a wider range of locks than even something like this would be. Then we also have something like the Sparrow's mace set, and this is all of the mace picks, the expansions and everything. So this is sort of like the maximum size of this in this little leather case that I put it in here. But all the same, this can be slipped into a pocket, and probably a more wide range of pockets than something like this, and go fairly unnoticed just because of its flat profile, while still giving you quite a bit of capability and a number of pick profiles. And in this case, even a tensioner here that can serve as both the top of the keyway and a bottom of the keyway, which is a nice addition, frankly, for the mace picks, because otherwise you are using the tensioners that are built in. And while you can kind of double these up to kind of increase your thickness, it's not the most user-friendly thing in the world, but of course you're trading off for portability and concealability and all of those abilities. But arguably, I would say that this is a better covert carry set than the covert companion is, even if it is in some ways more limited. Practice with these enough and you're going to be opening the same locks, I think, than you would be in the majority of situations as you would with something like the Rift Pick. Then there's always the other option, right? There is your like full-size EDC, and even the Covert instruments case here is rather large. I do really like it because of that lack of Velcro. That magnetic closure is really cool. Of course, this is going to require maybe wearing a jacket or something like that, or this is in a separate bag, which is maybe not always ideal. But I do carry this on a daily basis. So this is either in a jacket pocket, or if I have large enough pockets like cargos or something like that, I do carry this on a regular basis. And for those kind of situations where lighter clothing or just lighter carry is kind of warranted, this is my go-to. I very rarely ever actually carry these because I probably need more practice, but I'm not a huge fan of just the Bogatals like this, but I should probably get better acquainted with them. But again, these aren't as suitable for single pin picking all the time, and that's what I spend the majority of my time doing. So those are my go-to EDC options. I did carry this around for a while to see if it would be a suitable replacement, and I just found it unwieldy. Not unwieldy, but just inconvenient, because I do tend to carry a lot of things in my EDC. Generally, I have a knife, I have a flashlight, I have a firearm. You could argue I have too much stuff as part of my EDC. But when you start getting all of that kind of stuff together, having something that occupies as much space in a pocket and in a form factor that's not really ideal for kind of laying, this will lay flat against my phone, no problem. This is not going to. So this becomes kind of uncomfortable and unwieldy in that respect. And that's why this probably is not going to continue to be part of my EDC, even though I think the design is clever in a lot of ways. I'm just not sure if it is the answer. Not for me, anyway. Now, that being said, you take this and you wrap this up in a rubber band with these, and you have, again, a very small, this is probably what I'll end up doing, actually. So while I will not, in all likelihood, continue to use the Covert Companion sort of in its intended form factor, what I can see doing here is I'm going to pop all of these out, throw them on ball chains, and then they just go in different bags and cars and everything like that, so that they're nearby, but they're not going to be part of my immediate daily carry. So yeah, they'll be accessible, but not on my person. And I think that's perfectly fine for the kind of tools that, and I'm specifically talking about like the warded picks here, the jigglers. This is an extremely useful tool. So this decoder is going to go find its new home right in this little case here, and it's going to be added into my pretty discreet EDC carry in that respect. This is something that you could slip behind your phone in a phone case, for example. So it's something that you could even slip in behind your phone case, like this cool shout out to TCM Security and their awesome little pick sets that they give away. But that could find a nice little home in that phone case, maybe even with some of those mace picks beside it because they lie flat enough, and then you'd be good to go. And then finally, I think these tensioners are really fantastic. I really, really like these tensioners. So these are going to find their home in my larger EDC set and replace the Sparrows tensioners that I have in there, because these are just stellar. Really, really like those tensioners. And then something like the Riv pick, I think, is going to make a really compelling carry if we pair it with some of these tensioners. We just rubber band this guy like this. Now you have a nice little concealable package that gives you a variety of tensioners to select from and a good set of pick profiles. Am I missing all the whiz-bang bypass stuff? Yes, I am. But as far as capability goes and that trade-off with concealability, I think this is actually a really good solution. I could see myself carrying this quite a bit, so I'll probably try that out. You could slip this into a number of discrete pockets. You could even potentially sew this into like a hem or something like that. But that's kind of my thoughts on the Covert Companion, and I guess a little bit of brainstorming on the side about what I'm going to do with these tools now that I've kind of shared my conclusions based on this. I hope that was interesting. I hope that was helpful. If you're looking at getting a Covert Companion yourself, hopefully that informed your decision a little bit better one way or the other for the right situations, for the right kind of uses, and the right kind of situations. I think the Covert Companion is a pretty cool design, not without its flaws, but let's be realistic here. Everything in life is trade-offs. So one way or another, you're making a trade-off. The trade-offs here might be perfectly worth it to you, or they may not be. And be that as it may, it's another cool option to have on the market for this hobby, or in some cases, maybe more than a hobby. Maybe it's your profession. But anyway, once again, thanks for watching, everybody. I do truly appreciate it. Take care, and I will catch you later.